The rain had stopped just before dawn. A low mist clung to the hedgerows of Normandy, muffling the sound of distant artillery. The battlefield smelled of oil, cordite, and churned earth. On a country road outside Saint-Lô, Oberleutnant Hans Riedel, of the Panzer Division, stood with his binoculars raised, scanning the smoking horizon. Burned-out vehicles dotted the fields. American half-tracks, trucks, and the hulking shapes of tanks lying still in the mud. Behind him, a squad of engineers trudged through the wreckage toward a peculiar prize, an intact M4 Sherman tank, abandoned by its crew after a direct hit jammed its tracks. Its olive-drab hull was pocked with shrapnel, but otherwise unscathed, the white star of the US Army still visible under streaks of soot. Riedel lowered his binoculars. "Get the recovery team. I want this one moved before nightfall." The Germans had seen Shermans before, many of them in fact, but rarely one this complete. To most tank crews, the American machine was nothing special, undergunned, under-armoured, and prone to catching fire. They called it the Tommy Coacher, the Tommy Cooker, a joke, a coffin on tracks. But something about this one made Riedel curious. As the engineers circled the vehicle, their commander, Hauptmann Karl Schreiber, climbed onto the hull, brushing away mud with his glove. "Strange thing," he muttered. "No complicated shirts and armour plates, no interlocking hull seams. It's simple." "Crude, you mean?" one of the mechanics said, smirking. Schreiber shook his head. "No. Simple. There's a difference." By afternoon, a German SD KFZ-9 Famo recovery half-track arrived, its engine growling as cables pulled the 30-ton Sherman free from the ditch. The tank slid onto the road, battered but whole, and was soon trundling east under tow. Its destination, a captured airfield near Chartres, where a team from the Heereswaffenamt, the Army Weapons Office, awaited to examine it. As the convoy moved out, Riedel climbed onto the tank's turret and looked toward the west, toward the invisible front, where American columns kept pouring through the bocage like a river of steel. For weeks, German commanders had asked the same question: how can they keep coming? By the time night fell, Riedel thought he might finally see the answer. July 22nd, 1944. Chartres, France. The captured M4 Sherman sat beneath a makeshift canopy in the courtyard of a requisitioned French hangar. The smell of oil and hot steel hung thick in the air. Around it, a small team of German officers and engineers worked under floodlights, clipboards in hand, voices low and skeptical. "Typical American showpiece," one of them muttered. "Too tall, too noisy, built for parades, not war." But Hauptmann Karl Schreiber, head of the examination detail, wasn't so sure. He circled the tank slowly, boots echoing on the concrete. The Sherman's armour was welded, not riveted, unrefined by German standards, yet sturdy. The hatches opened easily, with large handles that could be gripped even in gloves. The edges were rounded, smooth, practical. He climbed onto the hull, ran his hand over the 75mm M3 gun, and then down toward the turret ring. "Look at this machining," he said softly. "No precision fitting, no delicate tolerances, just wide clearances and reinforced bolts. Even a half-trained worker could build this." The others looked up. "Impossible. That's not how tanks are made." Schreiber smiled faintly. "Not our tanks, no." He motioned for the maintenance crew to open the rear engine deck. The heavy panels swung up easily on robust hinges. Simple, reliable. Inside, the Ford GAA V8 engine gleamed beneath a layer of grime. One of the engineers whistled. "That's enormous." 500 horsepower, Schreiber said, reading from a captured manual. "But listen to this. Interchangeable with the Continental Radial, they can swap entire engines between factories." The men exchanged glances. That was unthinkable for a Panzer. Back in Germany, the mighty Panther and Tiger tanks required expert craftsmen, micrometer fittings, and precise machining. A broken final drive could take weeks to repair. A destroyed gearbox, often months. But this This American tank looked like it could be repaired in hours. When they removed the side armor plates to access the suspension, one of the mechanics laughed in disbelief. "This can't be right. Look at these bolts. They're all the same size." Schreiber nodded. Interchangeable parts, like their rifles, their trucks, even their aircraft. It's industrial warfare. Later that evening, a civilian engineer from Krupp, Professor Ernst Heller, arrived to oversee the teardown. He had designed Panzer components for a decade and was used to German complexity, layered armor, intricate drive systems, elegant engineering. But as he studied the Sherman, his expression darkened. "Everything about this tank is ugly," he said finally. "Ugly, but clever." Schreiber raised an eyebrow. "How so?" "They've traded craftsmanship for speed," Heller said, pointing at the suspension. "See this? A modular bogey system. 6 bolts, lift it out, replace it. No precision calibration. The Americans can build one of these in a few days, maybe less. He trailed off, while we take months to build a Tiger." At that same hour, far to the west, those very Shermans were rolling off landing ships and crashing through the hedgerows, one after another. Factories in Detroit, Chicago, and Cleveland were running 24 hours a day, churning out tanks faster than the Wehrmacht could destroy them. Back in the hangar, Schreiber scribbled notes in the margin of his report. "This machine is not superior in design. It is superior in philosophy. It is built for war, not for engineers." He looked again at the olive-green hull, at the crude welds and simple lines, and for the first time since Normandy began, he felt something like fear. "Gentlemen," he said quietly, "we may have underestimated them." July 24th, 1944, Chartres, France. Morning sunlight slanted through the hangar windows, cutting across the dissected hull of the American Sherman. The floor was littered with panels, bolts, and oily rags. Around the stripped-down carcass, the German engineers moved like surgeons mid-operation, except these men weren't trying to save a patient. They were trying to understand how it could possibly exist. Professor Ernst Heller, the civilian engineer from Krupp, crouched beside the open transmission housing. "You see here," he called out, "the gear assembly. It's simple, direct, only 3 major components." He tapped the metal with his wrench, the sound echoing in the still air. "No complex planetary reduction system like the Panthers. It will never match our precision." "Maybe not," replied Hauptmann Schreiber, "but it doesn't need to." The men fell silent as Schreiber stepped forward, holding a clipboard filled with notes from the previous day. "Our Panther tanks spend more time in workshops than they do in battle. The transmission alone requires a week of servicing for every 50 hours of movement. This," he gestured at the Sherman's open belly, "could be repaired by a farmhand with a wrench." From the far side of the hangar, a junior officer approached with a clipboard of his own. "Herr Hauptmann," he said cautiously, "we've received reports from the front. The Americans lost more than 100 Shermans at St. Lo last week." Schreiber raised an eyebrow. "And how many replaced them?" The officer hesitated. "Twice that number, sir. By the 3rd day." A heavy silence settled over the group. Even Heller stopped working. Everyone understood what that meant. That afternoon, Schreiber and Heller walked together along the edge of the airfield, the sound of distant artillery rumbling to the west. Supply convoys rolled past. Horse carts, trucks, and half-tracks, all overloaded with spare parts and fuel for the Wehrmacht's exhausted panzers. "They're not winning with better tanks," Schreiber said finally. "They're winning with more tanks." Heller nodded grimly. "Our factories can't keep up. We build perfection. They build plenty." He reached into his coat pocket and unfolded a captured intelligence leaflet that had been taken from a dead American pilot. Printed on it were statistics. Simple, almost boastful. 1 M4 tank every 30 minutes. 1 Liberty ship every 4 days. Heller stared at it for a long moment before crumpling it in his fist. "You know," he murmured, "I used to laugh at American engineering. Too crude, too noisy, too simple. But now I see it differently. They've turned their entire nation into a factory. Their engineers build for the unskilled, so that even unskilled men can build for war. Schreiber looked back toward the hangar, where the gutted Sherman gleamed in the sun. It's not a tank, he said quietly. It's a blueprint for victory. That evening, the engineers finished reassembling the Sherman. They bolted its panels back together in less than 6 hours, a task that would have taken 2 days for a German Panzer under similar conditions. When they fired the engine, the Ford V8 roared to life with a smooth, throaty growl. The Germans exchanged glances, a mixture of admiration and unease. Heller removed his cap and wiped his brow. "How many of these do they have?" he asked. "Intelligence says around 40,000, Schreiber replied. Heller exhaled slowly. 40,000. He turned away, muttering to himself. "We can't even keep 3,000 Panthers running at once." Hours later, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Schreiber sat alone in his quarters, writing his report for Berlin. His pencil scratched steadily across the page. Observation: the M4 Sherman represents industrial simplicity on a scale we cannot match. Interchangeable components, rapid assembly, minimal machining. The Americans have removed the craftsman from the equation. Every factory, every man can build these tanks. Their strength is not in design, it is in production. He paused, then added one final line. We cannot outfight their tanks faster than they can build them. He laid down the pencil and rubbed his temples, listening to the distant rumble of approaching artillery. The thunder of guns rolled across the French countryside. Not just the sound of battle, but of inevitability. The realization had come too late. While Germany was still building machines of perfection, America was building machines of victory. August 2nd, 1944, Essen, Germany. The air was thick with the sound of hammers and the smell of oil. Inside the vast halls of the Krupp-Grusenwerk, sparks rained from welding torches as men worked beneath posters proclaiming Sieg durch Technik, victory through technology. But for the engineers who had just returned from France, those words rang hollow. Professor Ernst Heller stood beside a disassembled Panther USF-G transmission. Nearby, 2 machinists strained over the delicate task of aligning the planetary gear system, a process requiring micrometer precision and hours of patience. Heller watched, shaking his head. "Each gearbox takes 4 days, he said softly. 4 days to build something that can fail in 1 hour. At the end of the production line, the plant foreman, Oberingenieur Schaefer, approached him with a clipboard. "The ministry wants another 200 Panthers by September, he said grimly. "We don't have the steel, we don't have the workers, and we certainly don't have the time." Heller didn't answer. Instead, he thought back to the Sherman in Chartres, its simple bolts, its quick-release components, its interchangeable engine mounts. Crude, yes, but genius in purpose. He turned to Schaefer. "Do you know what shocked me most when we examined that American tank?" Schaefer frowned. "What?" "That it wasn't designed by soldiers or engineers. It was designed by industry." He walked over to a chalkboard and began sketching from memory. Square armor plates welded in place, a simple suspension bogie, the cylindrical turret. Every part of the Sherman is meant to be built fast. Look, no interlocking seams, no hand fitting, no custom machining. They can build one in less than a week. Schaefer let out a low whistle. "Impossible." "Not in Detroit," Heller replied. "They build automobiles by the tens of thousands. Now they build tanks the same way. While we handcraft one masterpiece, they stamp out 100 workhorses." So, across the Atlantic, in that same August of 1944, the Detroit tank arsenal in Michigan was a world away from Essen's despair. The factory floor was a blur of motion. Welders, riveters, cranes, swinging turrets into place like toys. Women in overalls tightened bolts. Men with clipboards inspected rows of engines lined up like soldiers. Every 12 minutes, another Sherman rolled off the line. Each one was nearly identical, because that was the point. The Ordnance Department had standardized every nut, every bolt, every gear. A part made in Pittsburgh fit perfectly into a tank built in Chicago. Engines could be swapped between units on the front lines with a few wrenches. In one photograph from that summer, an assembly line worker leaned against the hull of a fresh M4A3, smiling proudly beneath a banner that read, "The tank that will end this war." She wasn't far wrong. Back in Germany, the same efficiency was impossible. Allied bombing raids crippled transport lines. Skilled machinists were drafted into the army. Critical alloys were scarce. The Luftwaffe had lost control of the skies, forcing factories to operate only at night. In the underground workshops near Kassel, engineers toiled under flickering lamps, hand-fitting parts for the Tiger II, a monstrous machine of 70 tons, magnificent but doomed by its own complexity. One day, while inspecting a half-assembled Tiger, Hella watched a team of mechanics trying to align its turret drive motor. They cursed as the gears jammed. The tank wouldn't turn. Hella turned to Hauptmann Schreiber, who had joined him in Germany to deliver the findings from Chartres. "This is what we've become," Hella said quietly. "We're building machines that are too perfect to survive." Schreiber nodded. "And the Americans? They're building machines meant to be replaced." Weeks later, a report reached Berlin, classified Geheime Kommandosache. It summarized the findings from the captured Sherman examination. The final paragraph, approved by the Heereswaffenamt, read, "The Americans have achieved total industrial mobilization. Their tanks are not superior individually, but they can replace their losses faster than we can transport spare parts. We are no longer fighting an army. We are fighting an economy." At the bottom, an officer had penciled a note in the margin. "If this continues, the war is lost." By September, American columns were rolling through France, their Shermans rumbling past villages that had been fought over just weeks before. Each time one was knocked out, another replaced it within days. Mechanics stripped parts from wrecks, bolted them into new hulls, and kept moving. In the mud of Normandy and the streets of Paris, the legend of German engineering was dying, not because it was weak, but because it was too strong for a war that demanded speed, not beauty. In the end, the Americans had proven something far more devastating than superior armor or firepower. They had proven that mass production was the new weapon of war, and that a factory in Detroit could destroy a division in Normandy. Late that autumn, as Allied tanks rolled toward the Siegfried Line, Schreiber stood once more beside a burned-out Sherman. He placed a hand on the scorched metal and whispered to himself, "We mocked this machine, and it buried us." He looked east, toward the heart of Germany, where the last of the Reich's factories still burned through the night, building miracles that would never be enough.